Big Nurse, aka Nurse Ratched, as we come upon this tale, a fable told about a mercy nurse. Nurse Ratched, or as the new series now on Netflix is called, simply Ratched. It's the strangest of anti-heroes, is Ratched. But let's go back to where it all comes from. It's an origin story after all, this new series. It's an 8-part new series, but there's more to it than meets the eye. And so, the strangest of anti-heroes, we go back to American popular culture, popular literature. 1963, actually 62, it was first written, and that's Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. A powerful and controversial novel, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, set in an Oregon psychiatric hospital in the early 60s, when, of course, the care for patients with mental health conditions is quite, one could say, extremely archaic compared to today's standards of healthcare for mental health. So there's a war going on in the psychiatric hospital in Oregon, a war against the symbol of freedom, an emancipated male who incorrectly is placed in the hospital, he believes. His name is Randall Patrick McMurphy, and he becomes pretty much famous from this book, which is later turned into a film, none other than Milos Forman, who went on to do Amadeus, I believe, in the 80s. But in 1975, he did a rendition, an adaptation of Ken Kesey's now famous book, brought into popular culture with Big Nurse, the large-breasted head nurse of the institution for those who are criminally, some, insane, and for those who have mental disorders and dysfunctions. It's there in a 100% male patient hospital that Big Nurse, known as Nurse Ratched, played beautifully by Louise Fletcher, who went on to win an Oscar for the performance. It all comes into where it is by standards today of what we think of Nurse Ratched. A villainous, mean-hearted, mean-spirited, corrupted woman who, for no reason we can see in the book or in the film, of why she is so corruptible, why she tests and preys upon the patients in the hospital, the psychiatric ward. But Big Nurse's power struggle with McMurphy the patient, the rebel, it unpacks for us the lengths that systemic prejudice goes when it comes to mental health. It's a nefarious tyranny of control that will destroy everything around her. And the free spirit of a man, Randall McMurphy, is destroyed virtually by this nurse, this head nurse who will not take no for an answer and wants to completely control the patients. Now, of course, who will be lobotomized and who will not? Will this free spirit, from a one tap on the frontal lobe, destroy McMurphy's power to succeed and win over Big Nurse, Nurse Ratched, or not? But like I said, in the 1975 film, she's painted as a ghastly villain. And from that time on, the character of Nurse Ratched has been, and the characters, I guess, and the symbols of nurses have been associated with this terrible tyrant. In fact, possibly, single-handedly, one character in pop culture has been able to, in fact, influence the way we see nurses today. Or at least that's going to be reinvigorated and re-examined with the release of Netflix's Ratched, based on Big Nurse. Now, I believe back in 1970s, Louise Fletcher herself often thought that the nurse was given a hard deal, a done bad deal, because of who she was and the way that she was treated. Afterwards in Hollywood, she pretty much had a hard time getting any role that wasn't a villain. So is Nurse Ratched a villain? And what does Ratched, this new series, this new reimagining of the story, and an origin story, but not a superhero origin story, She doesn't have superpowers, but you see, now I'm going to spoil it all with spoilers ahead. So if you don't want to keep watching this podcast, feel free. If you don't want to know what happens in the following episodes, well, you might want to turn off now. Otherwise, stay with us and we'll explore the Mercy nurse known as Mildred Ratched. Because actually, in this new series, this adaptation, she's for the first time given a name. She has no first name in the book by Ken Kesey or in the 1975 film. But now Ratched has become Mildred Ratched. So it's a humanizing of this villainous character, which makes it really interesting. A turn of events when we're looking at popular culture. Now, of course, the reinvention of this queen of bad nurses, Ratched, also puts into the whole perspective of good nurse and bad nurse, bad nursey, good nursey. Isn't it the symbols that we see every day, particularly in the past, during World War II? Look at those propaganda posters. The nurse sort of cowering over the poor, defenseless and wounded soldier who's been out there, the Allied forces, fighting against the Nazis, only to be wounded, sometimes mortally. But there is an angel of mercy, the nurse. And that's sort of where Nurse Ratched starts, or Ratched, the series. It's set in 1947, post-World War II, and we see a woman who has gone in episode 1, which is called The Pilot, actually. She arrives at a motel on the northern part of the coast of California, a small motel right on the coast there by the sea, and sort of signs herself in. We're not sure why. We then find out that she has been a returned nurse corps, and so she's heading towards a new job and a new life at a hospital on the northern coast of California. And so the series goes into depth when we're looking at how Nurse Ratched becomes this nefarious character. So let's dissect the driving force behind and revisit a once loved to be hated character and ask the question, what happened to the nurses of mercy? Where did the sweet, hard-working, fearless, self-sacrificing, diligent martyrs of human loving and beneficentness, if there's such a word as beneficentness, where did these nurses go? I think single-handedly, Ratched has made them go somewhere that we did not expect, and that is to become villains. Those clean and unwavering, unselfish and soft-spoken darlings of, symbols of freedom, symbols of caring, virtue and mercy, get rear-ended and become creatures to fear and loathe thanks to Ken Kesey's character Ratched. In a bizarre and highly effective reversal, Ken Kesey's character has taken all of the aspects of totalitarianism in the system. It's a controlling and barbaric and brutalizing system and dehumanizing system, and projected these into a matriarchy of the devouring mother who just happens to be a nurse. So there's a lot of, I guess you could say, misogynistic symbols here. So Ratched, in a way, this new series is taking it to the next stage, or actually the world before that happens, and what turns this, complex character into becoming the monster that she later becomes by the 1960s. Like I said, it is 1947, and what's interesting, for those who do watch Netflix series, you may be interested to know that it's set at the same time frame, same year, as Ryan Murphy's other project, released earlier this year, Hollywood, set amongst the golden age of Hollywood, so-called. So it's the same year. Interesting. Whether the characters ever come across each other, well, that's not for me to say, and who knows? I have heard only today that there is to be a second season. So who knows where it could lead? A crossover, Hollywood meets the scalpel, Hollywood meets the lobotomy, who knows? Ratched, let us begin with an incision, and then a trypan, A tap, tap, tap into the unconscious mind of what is Ratched. Ratched is like the antithesis to Hollywood, the series I mentioned earlier. But in general, it's an antithesis. The era. It's Ryan Murphy. Is this his COVID era series? Maybe. Because frontline, operatives, nurses, our health caregivers, are all very essential, obviously, and are given the love hearts of so many people globally because of this terrible pandemic. Ratched, on the other hand, whether it's just purely coincidence, sort of turns out a little bit on its head and looks at, well, the nurse is not always merciful. Or is she? Are they? So anyway, set in the so-called Hollywood Golden Age as well, along with it being 1947, Mildred Ratched gets her job. She gets her way and goes to this, from a Catholic church en masse, where we see the very first scenes of a murder called the Clergy Killings by an Edmund Tolleson, 1947, opening scene. It's a church. It's the end of Mass. A late Friday night, perhaps, whenever Catholics do their Mass. It's probably anti-Catholic saying that. But anyway, Edmund Tolleson is the clergy killer. He murders these priests in their priestly habitat, their quarters. And in any case, we're not sure why this happens. And it's all done on a rainy night, the typical kind of generic, oh, my car has broken down, when he knocks on the door and a young priest lets him in, disturbing his masturbation time, as it turns out. Women's catalogues and their undies and bras, and Vaseline. Good old-fashioned Vaseline, even in the 40s. It's keeping people slippery. So we see this priest opening the door to this man who said his car has broken down, and of course it's Edmund Tolleson, the clergy killer. So he does the dirty deed, but one priest survives as a witness, hiding under the bed, and all we hear is the sounds of a knife cracking through, obviously, flesh, and it's the usual Foley sounds of the watermelon and the knife. But anyway, I digress. So the priest, young priest, survives, who sees this terrible deed done. Edmund Tolleson is arrested. He's taken to San Quentin on assessment for his psychiatric health, and he ends up at Lucia. Not Lucia, but Lucia, which is this asylum, but a little bit different. It's almost like a hotel. I mean, even the look of the place, when we first come across this so-called asylum or sanctuary, sanitarium, whatever you like to call it, it is just beautiful. Of the era, the colours are like Technicolor. It's like a late 1940s Hollywood set. Huge vista views, beautiful walls, and the colours are just saturated. Green, beautiful teal greens, strong oranges, cream, sheen, not matte on all the walls, polished columns, beautiful black polished columns, and wealthy and expensive looking vases everywhere. Polished tabletops, very large, and spacious. So much space and light. It certainly isn't the generic, rehabilitation or asylum that we're used to seeing in the movies, aka One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest from 1975. No, this is a stupendous environment. It's brand new, it's slick, and it's gorgeous. And all the nurses wear these amazing, very vibrant blues, Technicolor blues, with the nurse's hat, very traditional. And the orderlies wear beautiful button-down shirts and open shirts at the neck, and clean and crisp pants, and these seagrass greens. It's an amazing looking environment, such beautiful production. So then, of course, she gets the job through conniving and doing all sorts of deceitful but clever things, like inventing her own CV, which does not exist, a resume, and a job description that doesn't exist, and she makes herself, installs herself into the hospital, and eventually she becomes a nurse there. So the whole first episode is all about that, about her becoming part of this environment, but we're not sure why. She's clearly up to something. She's come from, we're not sure, an orphan's background, and she's come to this hospital. Now there she is in a role as a nurse, and at the same time she's finding herself involved with what seems like a dick, or should I say, that's the old language that would be used in a film noir. Film noir was so popular in this era. After the Second World War, probably during a little bit, but particularly after the Second World War, 46, 47, 48, 49, film noir, usually in these beautiful contrasting black and white films. The Big Sleep, you know, Humphrey Bogart movies, Lauren Bacall movies, Barbara Stanwyck, they're all there, these amazing women about who are always looking for help, and they go to a D or a Dick or an undercover, you know, detective. Now this particular character that Ratched gets involved with is staying at the same motel. I think he's in room 8, or it could be room 10. Any case, he's in that environment, and well, a relationship of some kind involving fetish becomes apparent. And then we see, obviously, it comes out that later on in the series that Ratched and this predilection she has for role-playing with her sexual partners all comes to the front. Something to do with being an orphan, but that's in the later episodes. So yeah, so now she's part of the hospital and involved in that. Obviously, you know, she's controlling that environment. Episode 1 is called The Pilot. We also get the introduction of the wonderful Amanda Plummer, who I haven't seen since probably, you know, Pulp Fiction by Quentin Tarantino. I'm sure she's been in lots of other wonderful stuff. But she plays Louise, aging flapper alcoholic who runs the motel, who has a penchant for leeches. Apparently it's good to cure arthritis, who would have known? So she likes the leeches, and she likes a little bit of the rum, so to speak. She runs the motel, and she's inquisitive and, well, let's just face it, really nosy and controlling. So she likes to know and keep tabs on whoever visits whoever's rooms. And so when she sees this mysterious undercover dick visiting Ratched's room, she starts to get a bit super nosy, which turns out in later episodes comes to be, yeah, of quite a vital importance when we find out more about Mildred Ratched and who she really is. She asks her if she's a vulture, because everybody is moving like vultures into the area because of Lucia. It's about to take Edmund Tolleson, the clergy killer. He's going to be housed in a wine cellar that's being turned into a, well, I guess you call it a prison bunker. And he'll be housed there and kept imprisoned there until he's assessed, because California had the death penalty still at this time in its history. And that brings in more characters, including the wonderful Vincent D'Onofrio, who we all know as Edgar from the first Men in Black back in the 90s. But of course he's done other stuff. He's worked with Kubrick, so there is that Kubrick-esque connection. The look of this place does remind me a little bit of The Shining. Just some of the size, it reminds me of the hotel in The Shining. And there are things that are reminiscent of the wide open vistas and spaces. So there's a Kubrick connection. I found it. But moving on. So Vincent D'Onofrio plays the governor, Governor Milburn, who wants something to catch the voters, to get their votes, to swing their way. He needs something. And of course, the clergy killings have fallen right into his lap. So what is he going to do about that? He gets his assistant, secretary, or PA, or whatever you like to call her, a PR person, and that is Cynthia Nixon. She plays Miss Briggs, and Miss Briggs is leaving her husband because she has a secret. And I think because we know Cynthia Nixon, ex-Sex and the City, I think we know what her secret is. In any case, she's brought him with the governor to try and find an angle they can sell for the future election that's coming up for governor. And so, of course, Edmund Tollison is their ticket, so they think. So they go to the asylum, or sanctuary, whatever you like to call it. They go to the rehabilitation centre of Lucia, and that's where we're introduced to a Dr. Hanover, Dr. Richard Hanover, a very, well, he's not a big tall man, but he certainly is incredibly comfortable in his skin. And he is possibly the first Filipino-American, as far as the actor goes, who plays him, the first Filipino-American to lead in such a series. So it's really great to see that representation, and he does it so masterfully. But of course, he has a secret too. And that's what this whole series is about. The different personas people put on, the different masks people put on, the different secrets and lies, and what's really going on. It's not so much about the patients and their mental health or mental conditions. It's more about the people who run this institution, about their state of health, their mental well-being, and what are they doing? Why aren't they inside the institution being fixed or rehabilitated, or whatever it's called? 1940s speak. Ice Pick. Episode 2 is the Ice Pick, where public lobotomies are shown to a small selective crowd, including the Governor of California, Milburn, his assistant Miss Briggs, and obviously Nurse Ratched is present, and of course head nurse, the wonderful Betsy Bucket. Yes, that's her name, Nurse Bucket. But in any case, we find Dr. Hanover, and he's got a revolutionary idea called lobotomies. So he gets the press in to take film and photographs of 4, not 1, but 4 lobotomies at once, using the old trypanning with the drill, the old hand drill. Ouch. And they're still conscious. And so they have to view this. And this is a selling point to say, look, we've got this amazing new way of dealing with people who have memory loss, people who have lesbianism, because that was considered a mental health condition, people who are daydreamers. There's even a young boy who, I don't think he's even 14, he's about to get a lobotomy. I mean, it's outrageous by our standards, because he daydreams. So there's probably a possibility he has Asperger's or type of autism spectrum. We also have the wonderful scene before the Ice Pick cometh, the lobotomy show and tell, and that is the peach scene, where the wonderful Judy Davis, who plays Nurse Betsy Bucket, has helped herself to a peach in the refrigerator at the hospital, in the hospital kitchen for the staff. And this peach apparently didn't have a name on it, so she's helped herself. It turns out it is none other than Mildred Ratched, Nurse Ratched's peach. Don't mess with Nurse Ratched's peach, if you know what I mean. That's peach perfect. Episode 3, Angel of Mercy. And this is where we look back in time, looking at the role that Nurse Ratched had in previous times, and that includes back in World War II. So we're kind of moving ahead. I want to move quickly through these episodes because, well, you know, you have to watch the series. It's really important that you get stuck into it. And there are things about Angel of Mercy that are so good, I don't want to ruin it for you. Please watch it and see. Because there's even Angel of Mercy Part 2. So it's 2 parts in this 8-part episode. So you can figure it out, which leads to episode 5, one of my favorites, and that's the dance, or the dance. And the dance is something that, I don't know, it's kind of generic in any film or television show where they have a sanitarium or an asylum that's in the, you know, in the storyline. There's always the dance. There's always the communal congregation and celebration. Not sure what people are celebrating, but in any case, the dance does happen, and that's where everything starts to unravel. aka the clergy killer Edmund Tolleson, and his new beloved, the femme fatale Dolly. Nurse Dolly isn't really a nurse. She turns out she's just an assistant nurse, and that's what's quite funny about this show as well. It has all these people who are supposed to be qualified. Well, they're not qualified at all. It's a load of crock. So Nurse Dolly is played wonderfully by Alice Eglert, who is Jane Campion's daughter. Yes, that's true. The one and only Jane Campion has a daughter who was in Beautiful Creatures, and now she fancies herself to be Jane Russell, a loose nurse, or a nurse's assistant, who's fallen in with a bad crowd, or in this case, a serial killer called, a priest killer, Edmund. Now, of course, by this stage of the series, you've learnt that Edmund is connected to Mildred Ratched. That's right. They're brother and sister. They're siblings with a difference. They're not genetically connected, but they were orphans and they've shared the same foster homes over a period of time during their youth. And that's when the shit really hits the fan. So in the dance, we see the coming together of all these characters in one big shock horror, which is a very normal horror type of motif, I guess. It's kind of meta as well, because an incident occurs at the dance, and you can guess it involves a knife, a guard, a black guard, a schizophrenic, multiple personality person, I should say, and it involves Nurse Betsy, Bucket, Nurse Ratched, more dancing, drug taking on the behalf of Dr. Richard Hanover, who is the director of the asylum / sanitarium, and it just turns into a total mess, which involves us to move to episode 6, which is not to be laughed at. It's kind of the getaway runaways episode. On the run. The fugitives are Dolly and Edmund, who are on the run, running from dogs that are after them, police dogs of course, and they find a derelict abandoned homestead farmhouse. Of course, Dolly seems to know quite a lot about what this farmhouse is about, which is interesting. She even finds a shotgun in the ceiling. So how she knew that was there, I have no idea. But she certainly knows how to use it. In any case, she's very much the femme fatale, and it's so interesting to see that she's scarier than actually Edmund, the clerical killer, so-called. And even he says, you know, Dolly, you kind of frighten me, because she's far more in control than she lets on. She's not some timid little nurse or nurse's assistant anymore. So yeah, by episode 6, that's fine and dandy. Then we get to the bucket list, episode 7. We're almost there, second to last episode. And this is the bucket list. Obviously it's a riff on Nurse Betsy Bucket, who by this stage has found out the deep dark secrets of Mildred Ratched, thanks to her friend Louise, who runs the motel, who's been sniffing around, as I mentioned a bit earlier, sniffing about and finding, some interesting things. A recording device that was under Ratched's bed, which has got some audio that may or not be the best to have as a record, involving a priest and the sound of skull being ice-picked. Yes, a lobotomy happened in the motel room while Nurse Mildred Ratched was making a confession. And it's a confession to the priest who was the last survivor of the clergy killers. So it comes full circle. Full circle. Full circle. Diabolical. Absolutely diabolical what this woman does. She has no moral compass, which she admits to herself. By this stage, by number 7, she's getting closer and closer to Briggs, Cynthia Nixon's character, and of course Sarah Paulson's Ratched. This series is really about lesbians falling in love, maybe. In this case, an ex-personal assistant to the governor of California and Mildred. I was going to say Mildred Pierce. Isn't that funny? I was thinking about Mildred Pierce. For people who don't know what that is, check it out. It's made about the same time. A wonderful film. Made later into a series with Kate Bloody Winslet. But anyway, I digress. Now back to Ratched and episode 7, the bucket list. So basically, dear old Betsy Bucket knows about the deep dark secrets of Mildred Ratched. They get together and form an alliance because their one aim in life is to get rid of Dr. Hanover, who's turning out to be an absolute prick, let's face it. You know, wonderful performance, but an absolute dickhead. In any case, he's a control freak who's definitely got some drug problems. He's always sticking some needles up his arm and he's completely hooked on drugs. I don't know the name of them, but they're pretty serious. Anyway, he's completely wired on drugs most of the time and going deeper and deeper and deeper and spiraling down and down and down into more and more problems. So, next thing we know in the bucket list, episode 7, they are approaching a patron of the arts, or a patron of medicine, a very wealthy young woman who's an heiress. And basically they say to her, look, come with us. The governor's about to strip away all of the funding because he just is in damage control, thanks to Edmund doing a runner in episode 6 and having killed a guard. So now the governor's pulled the plug on all the funding for the hospital, so now they have to look for alternatives. So Betsy and Mildred gang up together and decide we're going to try and sell and find our own advocates and someone to help fund the hospital. Get rid of Dr. Hanover, and then we can start again and help save the lives of those with mental health issues. Well, yes, that's the plan, and keeping it all together. They both work together. And it's an interesting twist in events. So that's number 7, the bucket list. And the reason I think it's called the bucket list, not just because it's a play on words, but it's also because Ratched actually divulges to the wealthy woman who's the patroness and to Nurse Bucket, because she's sitting there in the same same room. She says to her what the real story is behind Dr. Hanover. You see, Betsy Bucket's had a candle. She's been lighting a candle, a little love heart, for our friend Dr. Hanover, who turns out to be a drug fiend. But more than that, the tale is revealed that all this time Dr. Hanover has been pursued by a woman called Mrs. Osgood, a wealthy heiress played amazingly by the one and only Sharon Stone, with a monkey, a capuchin monkey. How good is that? Her son has a mental illness where he likes to prick people and burn people. So all the servants get pricked, and it's not cool to go up and prick somebody. It's just, I don't know what the term is, but it's not cool at all. So Henry Osgood, his name is, this young chap, he becomes a patient of a Dr. Banyara, is in fact Dr. Hanover, before going to open this new hospital. So back in the day, back in the 40s, he was actually this other identity as a Filipino psychiatrist who worked to try and help people in Japanese internment camps and because of their psychological illnesses. Now, amazing that they would bring this into the story, but it's very interesting. So Dr. Bannaga, played by the wonderful John Briones, is also Dr. Richard Hanover. So Dr. Bannaga back in the day was trying to get work, and he went to Mrs. Osgood, found out about her son having this illness, and then said, I can cure your son. Not just treat him, I can cure him. I know what's wrong with a mental malady. I can actually cure this person. So that's what he tries to do, using lysergic acid, of course LSD. In its infancy was used a lot as experimental, stuff on people with mental conditions. Of course, was used in the army as well, and didn't always have very good results, of course, as well, we can imagine. So, Dr. Hanover or as he's known back then, Dr. Banaga, uses the lysergic acid, just 20 ml drop in Henry's, Osgood's, glass. And while his back is turned, of course, Henry pops in the rest of the bottle. From the small bottle, all of it goes into his glass. Unbeknownst to him, Dr. Banaga drinks it, and as you can imagine, has the trip of his life, which is not a good thing. Which involves a scene of amputation. It's very graphic, people. You may want to watch that carefully, or you may not want to watch it. You might want to just fast forward it. But in any case, not going to go over that scene again and again, but let's just say it involves a gardener's limbs and the reapplication of those to Henry's severed limbs. Of course, Dr. Hanover is dismissed of his position as a mental physician, failing terribly, obviously, and does a runner. Mrs. Osgood, meantime, has hired the dick I mentioned earlier, so-called dick, who is not just a dick, but, in fact, is a hitman. But that's in the earlier episodes, and you would have seen those by now, I hope. Any case, we now forward to the bucket list, and that's why it's not on the bucket list. The, obviously what Dr. Hanover used to do. Betsy Bucket didn't know about this. She's had a crush on this man for years, but didn't know that he was actually, as dodgy as anything. And so we finish with episode 7. Much planning to do to get Dr. Banaga out of the picture, which involves Dr. Banaga being exposed to Betsy Bucket about his notorious past as someone called Dr. Banaga, from Dr. Hanover to Dr. Banaga. And there's an arrangement made between Betsy and Mildred that Huck becomes head nurse, Betsy becomes the director of the asylum, and Mildred just is happy to be alive and has a job, So that's happening. We've got another character who comes in at this time in this episode called Charlotte. Now Charlotte is an interesting character. She has multiple personalities. You could say she's a black Sybil, maybe. Sophie Okonedo, who is a wonderful British actress. She's a black British actress of Jewish and Nigerian descent, and you may have seen her in several British television shows and films over the years, but she's been wonderful. Recently, last year, she was in the new Hellboy film as Lady Hatton. She plays this woman, Charlotte Rose, who has these multiple personalities and trauma that was triggered because she was kept and confined by a group of racist white boys when she was younger, and they beat her and starved her and beat her over a period of 9 to 10 days. So she survived that, thankfully. However, it has affected her mental well-being, where she has protected herself by having these different multiple personalities. And one of them is none other than Jesse Owens. Jesse Owens, who was the 4-time gold medalist in the 1936 Berlin Olympics. That's right. And she's got this very strong, aggressive character who is this Jesse Owens. Of course, she isn't Jesse Owens, but she thinks she is, who comes out when she's under pressure and under stress, and he wants to kill Adolf. And anyone in her sight is Adolf. Unfortunately for Dr. Banaga, dear Charlotte Rose with the multiple personalities thinks that he now is the personification of Adolf Hitler. And that's bad luck for him, because it involves a knife, and that's the end of that character. In a motel room, because he's on the run, he's taken Charlotte Rose because he believes he can cure her with hypnotism, and they're on the run. And in a hotel room, not a good idea to put someone who's triggered by confinement, to put them in a closet to hide them. Not a good idea while you're being investigated and you're on the run. So you can see where that leads. Mildred then finds out that Charlotte has now come to as Charlotte, rings Mildred. Mildred comes to get her at the motel, finds Dr. Banaga / Dr. Hanover's body, and Well, some of you may guess what's going to happen to that person next. It involves, yes, Mrs. Osgood receiving something in a hat box from Mildred. So Mildred comes across some money that, from a job that she's done for Mrs. Osgood as revenge, and becomes a supplicant for that, and with that money they head to Mexico. And this is by episode 8. It's the last episode as well. It's the last episode. Finally, it's called Mildred and Edmund. And in this last episode, it's really about the portrayal of those two characters. We all know what happened to Mildred by this stage, and Edmund. What happened to them in a particular home where they were fostered as orphans, where they were sexually abused and made to display that in a puppet theatre in front of perverts, wealthy perverts, in a basement in a very wealthy home. It has affected them deeply as children, traumatised them, absolute trauma. And that trauma, of course, has triggered all these other things. So Mildred is trying to save her so-called brother, who isn't really her brother, Edmund, from the electric chair, simply because the governor has now decided that lethal injection isn't cracking it anymore. Lethal injection? Huh? Everyone wants to see somebody fry. That has more of an audience appeal. Plus, it is an election year. And so, long story short, Mildred wants to reconnect with her brother. He's now managed to get out of the hospital. It's a bit convoluted at that point. They've got out of the hospital. She knows, and her brother knows, that somebody has got to pay for these sins. Mildred knows that she has to pay for the sins, and Edmund knows that he has to get Mildred because he feels betrayed by her. So really the last episode is about their relationship and the way that they've betrayed each other, which involves moving to Mexico. Mildred is now in a relationship with Gwen Briggs, the ex-secretary for the governor of California, who's a bit like a early version of Ronald Reagan, let's face it. And they journey to Mexico safe and sound. Now that they're friendly with Nurse Bucket after all this time, Nurse Bucket pays them a visit, but there's always the shadow. There's always looking over the shoulder. Over the shoulder. Is Edmund there? Is Edmund watching? You'll have to find out. Episode 8's the last episode. So watch Ratched and you can find out what happens. And if there is a next season, which according to Instagram, Twittering, and rumour threads, it looks like that is the case. I'm looking forward to this universe expanding, but if it didn't expand, I'm happy with this as an origin story. I'm happy with the look of it, I'm happy with the way I felt watching it, and I did not feel that it was too gratuitous when it came to mental health. Perhaps there could be some work still done with representation. There aren't any Indigenous people in this, like there was in the 1975 film version. There wasn't any Chief Bromden, who's the narrator, in the 1975 film version. But like I said, this is an alternate history and an origin story for Big Nurse Ratched. So yeah, that's it. Ratched. However, I just want to speak on the intro credits just for a moment before we do go, and the music that's used at the beginning of this podcast. It's amazing, the look of the whole thing at the beginning, the red thread being followed. I know that's a symbolism that's been used a lot in films in the last 20 or 30 years, but it's really effective in this case. We see the shadow or the back view of a young woman barefoot. I think she's like a patient perhaps, walking down corridors, pulling and following this thread to opening to a hole in the side of a building. She walks through down the corridor into this beautiful and dense forest of trees and keeps following this thread with various characters from her left and right until she gets to a black space, an open black space, and there the thread goes up to, we see the side view of Nurse Ratched in her vibrant blue scrubs, her blue nurse's uniform, and that's when the sewing shears come out, snip, and cuts the thread. Snip. The sound of those shears cutting thread is just delightful and menacing. And then the full frontal face profile of Sarah Paulson gazing straight at you, the viewer, is really unnerving. Those black brown eyes and the red lipstick with a black background and the reddish hair, done in the signature Nurse Ratched style, aka vis-a-vis in 1975, is entrapping. Enwrapping or entrapping, whatever. That's Ratched, and I was really impressed. The cast, John Briones, who plays Dr. Manuel Banaga, I've mentioned it before, and Dr. Richard Hanover is exquisite. Filipino-American actor taking a lead role, just masterful. In just incredible Japanese internment discussion in the series. Never seen that before. He's got a great background in Miss Saigon. He's toured with Miss Saigon stage show since 1989. So he's a great actor. And of course he appears in Hollywood. The assassination of Gianna Versace, the American Crime Story, which of course is also Ryan Murphy production. Amanda Plummer, as I mentioned, is Louise, the motel owner, the flapper with the alcohol predilection. Just wonderful. Return to form. Vincent D'Onofrio, as I mentioned, as California governor. George Milburn. Also great to see character actors with so much heavyweightness coming in. As I mentioned, he was in Full Metal Jacket. The fabulous Judy Davis. It's good to see an Australian as Nurse Betsy Bucket. She's the head nurse with the head strongness, and she's just brilliant in it. We all know her from Barton Fink, Naked Lunch, My Brilliant Career, and most recently Feud, Betty and Joan, which is still yet to be released. We're still waiting for that. It looks marvellous with Jessica Lange. Another Ryan Murphy, but at this stage discontinued. Sophie Okonedo, as I mentioned before, the black British actress, has been in multiple, not just multiple personalities, but in multiple shows over the years. Sharon Stone as Leonora Osgood, Mrs. Osgood, the wealthy heiress with the conceited and mentally disturbed and deranged son who likes to prick people, who's now a full-on amputee, arms and legs akimbo, have gone go. She's just marvellous. Best performance of a monkey on a shoulder. Alice Engert, as I mentioned before, is Dolly, the assistant nurse, who becomes the romantic love interest in Femme Fatale with a shotgun. She alludes to Bonnie and Clyde, and if you watch that episode in particular, when they're on the run as fugitives, you'll know why. With Edmund, we know her as Jane Campion's daughter. Great cast, fabulous production. Flecky, and obviously the pièce de résistance, the queen herself, the big nurse, Sarah Paulson, who manages to pull off possibly one of the hardest villain roles ever in Hollywood in a very long time. She does it with aplomb. She does it very American Horror Story style, without too overtly melodramatic. This is melodrama, this is soap opera, but she manages to keep herself very contained and controlled, right in the epicenter. Like, all of these things are happening around this character. She holds it fast and holds it close and keeps herself so contained. It's amazing to watch this actress who's gone from actress to producer to executive producer in this series in such a short space of time. From American Horror American Horror Story to it was O.J. Simpson trial, I think it was. I can't remember the full name. She's done some amazing body of work, and this is just, yeah, all scrubs off to her. She's like, gloves off. She's nailed this. So, Ratched. All I can say is, finally, watch it, the Ratched, and be afraid of nurses. This is Sonja Hammer, and you've got Queer Geeks of Oz celebrating one of the first lesbian nurse melodramas on your screen. On Netflix now, for as long as they're going to screen it, I guess. I'm sure it's already in the trending zone.
I just feel like it's such a, I can't believe we're number one. I mean, it's so crazy. It was just like the thing I want to do most is just thank everybody for giving a shit about our show.
Number one already on the trending zone. One. Everything's going to be fine. Welcome to St. Lucia. Everything's going to be okay from now on. I want you to take a deep breath. I want you to let it all go. Let it all go. Let everything slip away. You're home now. My name is Nurse Ratched. You can call me Millie Mildred. Dinner is at 5. Why don't you have a lie down, Joanne?